Do you think so? You would be wrong. There is no strength in the hunger he possesses, and the will behind his power is a primal thing, and it devours him as he devours others. His mere presence kills all around him, slowly feeding him. He is already dead. It is simply a question of how many he kills before he falls.
He is the echo of a scream that never ended. Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, drifts through the galaxy not as a man, but as a void, cloaked in darkness. He is a whisper on the edges of dead worlds, his presence a hunger that devours not flesh, but the Force itself.
You are listening to the Star Lords Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
I got a bad feeling about this.
Creation. At the end of the Mandalorian Wars, a human male, whose true name is forgotten to time, suffered total loss. Amidst the chaos of galactic conflict, he lost his family, his friends, and eventually, even his will to live. His fate was sealed during the climactic Battle of Malachor V in 3960 BBY, where Jedi General Mitra Surik activated the Republic's mass shadow generator, a devastating superweapon that annihilated nearly all life on and above the planet. Yet, somehow, he survived. Surrounded by wreckage and death, the man became trapped in the mass shadows created by the weapon. The immense trauma and grief twisted into something unnatural, a gnawing hunger for Force energy. Initially, he drained another survivor by accident, an act that horrified him, yet temporarily relieved his pain and illness. But the hunger returned stronger. He fed again, and each time the satiation grew shorter, the craving deeper. Eventually, this broken man was discovered by Darth Traya, a former Jedi who recognized in him a wound in the Force. She brought him to Traya's academy on Malachor V, offering to train him in the dark side and teach him to feed his hunger more effectively, even to consume entire worlds. He accepted, and alongside another apprentice, Darth Sion, he trained under Traya's guidance. Over time, he took the name Darth Nihilus, and the trio established the Sith Triumvirate: Traya as the mind, Sion as the body, and Nihilus as the insatiable hunger.
Betrayal.
Though Traya strengthened Nihilus, she came to see his hunger as a threat to the Sith's goals. Nihilus, however, embraced it. He consumed worlds indiscriminately, growing ever more powerful with each feeding, even as the dark side devoured what remained of his humanity. When Traya's vision for the Sith clashed with his and Sion's desire for swift destruction, the alliance fractured. In 3955 BBY, Nihilus and Sion turned on their master, severing her connection to the Force and casting her into exile. Without Traya's leadership, the Sith again splintered. Nihilus and Sion continued their purge of the Jedi separately, Scion through assassination, Nihilus through devastation. Nihilus took command of a fleet torn from the mass shadows of Malachor and claimed the Ravager as his flagship. He scoured the galaxy's edge for concentrations of Force energy, consuming entire populations to feed his hunger. His most infamous act came with the destruction of Qatar, where he absorbed all life on the planet, sparing only Visas Mar, a Meraluka, whom he turned into his apprentice and shadow hand. As his hunger grew, Nihilus's physical form began to deteriorate. To prevent death, he bound his spirit to his armor and mask, held together by sheer will and the dark side. He became a hollow shell, no longer a man, but a force of primal intent. His voice could shatter minds, his presence could drain life. Audibly when he spoke, he was unintelligible, no more than rumbling sounds emanating from the void of his being, the meaning of his words understood only through the Force. Eventually, he created a Sith holocron to preserve his knowledge, and filled with ancient secrets. The Ravager.
Once a proud Centurion-class battlecruiser of the Republic Navy, the Ravager was torn to pieces in the final moments of the Mandalorian Wars, caught in the blast of the mass shadow generator over Malachor 5. The ship was crushed, burned, and abandoned, left to drift as just another corpse in the graveyard orbiting the dead world. Its wreckage might have remained there for eternity had it not been for the will of a ghost. Darth Nihilus, drawn to Malachor by his hunger and suffering, found the Ravager among the shattered hulks suspended in space, in an act of pure will and dark mastery over the Force. He resurrected the starship, not with repairs or reconstruction, but by holding its broken hull together through sheer power. What had been a derelict was turned into a floating necropolis. Despite its catastrophic damage, the Ravager became Nihilus's flagship, a vessel that should not have flown, let alone fought. The ship's infrastructure was fractured. Massive holes exposed the corridors to vacuum. Plating had been torn off by Mandalorian fire, and sparks danced along its hull, leaping in the void like lightning on a corpse. Scorch marks and twisted metal covered every surface. The starship was little more than a haunted shell, and the only most basic particle shielding was used to maintain minimal atmosphere. It was said that Nihilus deliberately left sections open to space, as if the ship itself were an extension of his broken, insatiable body. And yet, despite being held together more by will than by engineering, the Ravager remained a terror in battle. Its guns still fired, its hangars still deployed troops. The inside of the Ravager was no less horrifying than its exterior. The halls were dark, corroded, and cold, lit only by flickering yellow-orange lamps, struggling against decay. The flooring was rusted metal, long since oxidized by the time and lack of maintenance. Broken consoles lined the walls, many completely inert, others shorting out in fits of sparks and static. Loose wiring snaked along the corridors, and pipes dripped or hung open, leading nowhere. Whole sections of the ship were gone, torn open to the void, revealing black star fields through jagged holes in the walls. Rooms led into nothing. Some corridors still held crumbling beds, their lights dim or dead. Empty mess halls gathered dust, their seats still arranged in eerie silence. Armory still held weapons untouched by aging. Despite the decay, certain areas were still active. One docking bay remained functional, used by Nihilus' servant for deployment or retrieval. Doors still responded to commands, and hidden within the ship's ruined heart was a meditation chamber, once used by Visas Mar during her servitude. It was there she communed with the Force, tethered to her master by their bond. The crew of the Ravager were not living in any real sense. Those who served Nihilus were twisted by his power, many stripped of their will, their identities burned away by proximity to his hunger. They wandered its corridors like shades, maintaining nothing, merely existing, sustained only to fulfill their master's bidding. Though she was bound to her master by the Force, her living quarters were set apart, a cell of contemplation, carved from a section of war-racked metal, warped and dead like the rest of the ship. The ship wasn't flown, it was willed through space. The power that held it together, that kept its atmosphere intact and its systems marginally operational, was the same power that had once consumed worlds. The Ravager was not just Nihilus' flagship, it was an extension of his being, a physical manifestation of the destruction he had become.
Rising Terror.
It is not something he can direct or focus, much like hunger itself. He is more of a hole in the Force than a living thing. Force sensitives and worlds rich in the Force draw him. The Miraluka world was one such place. That is why where the Jedi gather, Jedi will die. He will feel it, unless they mask their presence. But Qatar called out as a beacon to him, and he could not resist it. And he cares nothing for the Sith, or its teachings, or the Jedi. And when the Jedi are dead, he will feed on the galaxy, the Republic, and eventually consume the Sith as well. There is no future in the empty galaxy he sees, and that is why he must be stopped. The breach must be sealed before his power grows beyond what even we can hope to stop.
As the Sith Triumvirate's influence grew, the Traeus Academy remained a dark crucible for Sith lords, assassins, and marauders. Under Darth Nihilus and Darth Sion, the Sith spread fear and death across the galaxy, turning Force sensitives into deadly instruments of their will. But while Sion's cruelty was visible, Nihilus's influence was felt more insidiously. Simply being near him drained the Force from others. His followers, altered by proximity, learned to leech energy from Jedi and track Force-rich prey across vast distances. In 3952 BBY, Jedi Master Atris attempted a bold gambit. She convened a secret Jedi conclave on the Miraluka world of Qatar, hoping to draw out the dark presence she had sensed and destroy it. Her bait succeeded all too well. As Nihilus approached Qatar, he unleashed his hunger not with weapons, but with his voice, a wave of power so devastating it obliterated the planet's surface, erasing all life sensitive to the Force. The Jedi Order, already crippled, lost many of its last surviving masters, Zar Lestin, Dorak, and Vandar Tokar among them. Atris survived, never having actually attended the conclave. Only one being remained amid the dead, Visas Mar, a Miraluka left barely alive. Nihilus found her, placed her into a death-like sleep, and brought her aboard the Ravager. When she awoke days later, healed, she asked why she had been spared. Nihilus gave no verbal answer. Instead, he shared his vision of the galaxy, a fragmented, chaotic mass of lives disconnected from the Force. To Nihilus, his hunger brought order to that chaos. The experience crippled her Force perception and gouged out the tissues of her vestigial eyes, binding her to him. Mar became his shadow hand, linked to her master by a deep Force bond that made them stronger or weaker depending on one another's state. Onderon.
Seeking further influence, Nihilus allied with General Vaklu, the head of a separatist movement on Onderon. Vaklu wanted to sever ties with the Republic. A Nihilus saw an opportunity to gain control of the planet. Through Colonel Tobin, Vaklu's aide, Nihilus maintained contact and orchestrated efforts to shift the Onderonian civil war in the separatist favor. On Duxon, Onderon's moon, Nihilus Sith began a dark ritual in the tomb of Freedon Nad, an ancient Sith lord, hoping to corrupt the war's outcome through a growing Force nexus. Meanwhile, a convergence of fate was unfolding elsewhere. Atris, obsessed with the dark side and her own fall, leaked the whereabouts of Mitra Surik, the Jedi exiled who had activated the mass shadow generator at Malachor V. Surik had returned from exile and began hunting the Sith Lords responsible for the Jedi's destruction, guided by Kreia, who had shed her Darth Treya persona. Atris intended for Surik to draw Nihilus out, just as she had done at Qatar. The plan succeeded again. Nihilus felt the echo of Surik's power. His hunger stirred. He sent Visas Mar to confront her, but Surik defeated Mar, and instead of killing her, showed her a different path. Mar began to question Nihilus's visions, and, with her bond to Surik growing, she turned against her master. Still, Nihilus's fleet continued its grim march, devouring worlds and feeding his hunger.
Telos 4. On Duxon, the dark ritual being performed by Nihilus's acolytes was attacked by a Mandalorian strike team led by Mandalore the Preserver and coordinated by Surik. Though the ritual was completed before the Sith were defeated, the effort to control Onderon collapsed when Surik and her allies rallied to the Royalists, helping Queen Talia crush the Separatists. General Vaklu was captured and executed, and Nihilus's strategy for seizing Onderon had failed. In the final chapter of his destructive reign, Darth Nihilus was deceived by his former master, Kreia, now scheming toward her own endgame, manipulated by Colonel Tobin into informing Nihilus of a Jedi Academy on Telos 4, a lie meant to lure the Dark Lord into a trap. Though the supposed academy held no real Jedi, only Atris, fallen and obsessed, Nihilus, driven by his unrelenting hunger, could not resist the promise of a feast. He turned his fleet towards Telos. As the Ravager approached the planet, it was met by a waiting force. The Republic Navy, reinforced by Mandalorian warriors under Mandalore the Preserver, prepared a coordinated ambush. The Battle of Telos 4 ignited, spanning the orbiting Citadel station at the skies of the planet. Despite realizing too late that the Academy was barren of Force sensitives, Nihilus attempted to consume Telos itself. His hunger no longer a rational weapon, only instinct. While the fleet clashed in space, Surik, Visas Mar, and Mandalore launched a bold strike. With Republic fire as cover, they boarded the Ravager. Mandalorians swept through the dying warship, planting proton bombs at key structural points. Along the way, the twisted remains of Colonel Tobin, warped by prolonged exposure to Nihilus's dark aura, tried to block their advance. But when confronted with the truth that Onderon would be next if Nihilus succeeded, Tobin faltered, too far gone to help, but no longer an obstacle. The final confrontation took place on the bridge. Nihilus, shrouded in robes and barely more than a shadow held together by hatred, faced the exile, his former shadow hand, and the Mandalorian leader. He tried to consume Surik's Force energy, as he had done to so many before, but failed. Surik's ability to draw strength from others rendered her immune to his drain. The Dark Lord, starved of sustenance, began to falter. Their duel was brutal. Nihilus stunned Surik, nearly ending the fight, but Mar intervened, offering her life to save the woman who had turned her from the darkness. Her sacrifice stalled Nihilus just long enough. Entering a trance, Mar severed their force bond, unraveling the thread that had once connected her to her master. Weakened, Nihilus became vulnerable. Together, the trio struck him down. Before leaving, Mar removed Nihilus's mask, driven by a need to understand the face of her destroyer. But there was nothing. No man, no expression, just a void, erupting in a storm of dark energy. As the trio escaped, the bombs detonated, tearing the Ravager apart. The Sith fleet fell with it. Yet, Darth Nihilus was not wholly destroyed. His spirit lingered, bound to his armor, which was later interred on Korriban. There, amid the dark side nexus of the Sith homeworld, his presence endured, a remnant of hunger that had once threatened to consume the galaxy. Dust and Echoes.
Though Darth Nihilus was destroyed aboard the Ravager, the void he embodied did not simply vanish. It echoed. After his death, Mitra Surik made her final descent into the graveyard world of Malachor V, confronting her old master, Kreia. But the Sith were never truly gone. In the shadows, another Sith Lord rose to take Nihilus's place, cloaked in secrecy as the Republic enjoyed a fragile rebirth. Likewise, the Jedi Order began to regrow from its own ashes, thanks in part to Visas Mar and other survivors who had fought alongside the exile. History's cycle, however, would not be broken so easily. Centuries later, in 3681 BBY, Sith and Jedi once again clashed in the Great Galactic War, a brutal conflict between the Republic and a resurgent Sith Empire. After the fire faded, the galaxy entered the Cold War in 3653 BBY, a 10th truce where neither side was truly rested. Despite Nihilus being a ghost of the past, echoes of his legend lived on. His visage, his mask and cowl became cult relics, copied and worn by galactic citizens with no real understanding of the darkness they imitated. During this uneasy peace, Nihilus's holocron resurfaced. The ancient device contained the trace of his spirit, came into possession of a crime lord, Diago Hixan, and kept it hidden in a cavern on Tatooine called the Light Spring. Sith agent Vaveron Zer attempted to retrieve it for the Empire, manipulating a smuggler, later known as the Void Hound, into helping her. But the smuggler chose the Republic instead, alerting the Jedi Knight Naril Prudence. What followed was a chaotic struggle that ended both Zer and Hixan dead, and the holocron in Jedi hands. Prudence set out to ensure the terrible knowledge within would never serve the Sith again. Centuries before the rise of the Empire, the truth of Nihilus's death was already becoming obscured. Jedi Master Bodo Bass recorded conflicting accounts. Some claimed Brianna the Handmaiden had slain him. Others believed Visas Mar had done it, or that she had fallen to him instead. These contradictory tales would later be compiled by Jedi historian Tion Solisar in Jedi vs. Sith, the Essential Guide to the Force. Even during the reign of the Galactic Empire, Nihilus's artifacts drew seekers. His mask was tracked to the unknown regions, hidden aboard an ancient freighter called the Nashwaga, on a planet Volek. 3 factions, a band of spacers, a Sith cult called the Apex Society, and a crew of pirates known as Sandoz Boys, all converged on the ship. After a violent confrontation, the spacers claimed the mask, though what they intended to do with it is unknown. Over a century after the fall of the Empire, the founder of the One Sith, Darth Krayt, discovered Nihilus's holocron, hoping to learn how to halt the Yuuzhan Vong organisms ravaging his body. Krayt sought wisdom from the ancients. He consulted the holocrons of Darth Nihilus, Darth Bane, and Darth Nihilus. But Nihilus gave no teaching, only a statement in his dead, devouring tongue. The others didn't translate it. Instead, all three spirits condemned Krayt's rule of one as heresy, unworthy of the Sith legacy they had shaped. Darth Nihilus left behind no empire, no disciples to carry on his name.
Legacy of the Void. Darth Nihilus was not a man, at least not for long. Power was not a tool to him, it was sustenance, and like all who hunger too deeply, he was consumed by it. Though he bore the title of Sith Lord, Nihilus had no true allegiance to the Sith or their teachings. Kreia, once his mentor, described him best, a creature of instinct, stripped of ideology, concerned not with domination, but devourment. He did not conquer to rule, he devoured to exist. Death was not his weapon, it was his state of being. Nihilus's transformation was physical and spiritual. His human body withered until only armor and a haunting white mask remained, vessels for his drifting spirit. His voice, barely a language, could bring agony to the living. Those who served him became empty husks, their wills eroded by his presence. Even his lone apprentice, Visas Mar, was little more than a reflection in his hunger, until she broke free. His abilities in the Force were unmatched in scope. He could feel Force sensitives across star systems, hunt them through the void, and strip entire planets of life in moments. But this immense power was also his prison. He was addicted to it, compelled to feed constantly, losing more of himself with each world consumed. His hunger, once an expression of trauma, became a bottomless pit that dictated his every move. He fought with an aggressive, one-handed style, never needing to outmaneuver his foes, only to outlast them. His knowledge extended deep into dark rituals, Force alchemy, and forbidden techniques. It was Nihilus who helped strip Kreia of her power through a dark variant of the Sever Force ability, and it was Nihilus, through sheer force of will alone, who raised the shattered corpse of the Ravager from Malakor's gravity well. Nihilus wielded a crimson-bladed lightsaber of his own making, though he rarely needed it. His true weapon was his hunger, felt across systems, feared across generations. His mask, a symbol of everything he had lost and everything he had become, survived him. The skull-like visage with distinct vertical red markings on bone white. Even after his defeat at the hands of Mitra Sirik, his spirit bound itself to the relic, allowing his spirit to endure even after his fall.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
In a galaxy where parsecs matter, choose the company that delivers light years ahead of the rest. From the outer rim to the core worlds, Import-Export LLC guarantees safe, secure, and discreet delivery of goods. Legal or, let's say, negotiably legal. Need hyperfuel delivered to a blockaded moon? Smuggling spice for medical use? Or just want your mom's maileroon pie on time for Empire Day? We've got you covered. With trained pilots, slicer-grade tracking systems, and optional stealth field upgrades, we'll get your shipment there or die trying. And we haven't yet. Import-Export LLC. Because trust is hard to come by in a galaxy full of bounty hunters.
Welcome aboard the Millennial Falcon. This is Christian.
And this is Jordan.
We're currently hovering over the once beautiful planet of Qatar before it was utterly devastated and consumed. It does look like life is coming back to the world, but it's certainly not what it used to be.
Absolutely. But before we get into such awful topics, let's talk about something good.
You don't want to talk about planetary genocide?
No. So talk about something good like our Patreon supporters, okay? If you're a Patreon supporter, we thank you for keeping this bucket of bolts flying. You do a better job than Nihilus keeping the Ravager flying.
I don't know. Sometimes it feels pretty close.
maybe kind of close, but in any case, I just wanted to let everyone know, if you wanted to become a supporting member, only $3 a month, and you get access to all the bonus content behind the paywall on patreon.com/starlores. For $5 a month, you not only get access to the bonus episodes, but you also get ad-free listening. So that's always fun. So if you guys want to support the show, that'd be awesome. Head on over to patreon.com/starlords and support the show. You can also, send in your questions, clarifications, corrections, whatnot, into the show. Email is best, starlordspodcast@gmail.com. You can also DM us, Instagram, Facebook, x.com. We're also on Discord, so message us and follow us on all the social medias. Also, if you want to help spread the good news of Star Lords, the best podcast on the HoloNet, you can rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Best two are Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So if you guys want to do that, that is awesome. Thank you very much. All right, Christian, back over to you.
All right. Well, we are discussing the first of the Sith triumvirate, implying that, yes, it's one of three. Darth Nihilus. Very cool character. Love his physical design. Very haunting. What are your initial thoughts on the man?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love the character as well.
Yeah. He plays a big role in a lot of the advertising for Knights of the Old Republic 2, which is where this character originated from. He was like in a lot of the marketing and advertising for it. There's even an iconic picture of him facing off against Atris. That never actually happens in the game, but it's a very cool piece of art.
Yeah, it is funny because he probably doesn't play as big of a role as it seems he plays.
Yeah, he seems like the big bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And he is. I mean, he could. The crazy thing about KOTOR 3 is they made, in my opinion, 3 excellent villains, all of whom could have been their own main primary villain in a separate story, but they like brought them together, and actually I thought it kind of worked. But yeah, you're right. In terms of the advertising, it was perhaps a little misleading.
Yeah, I think his mask is even very prominent on the cover of the game.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It definitely is.
He's a very interesting character, certainly. Surprisingly, considering the undue, I guess, weight he's given in the marketing and advertising, there isn't that much about him. There's still a lot of mystery to this character, even after years of like Star Wars IP development since the release of KOTOR 2. He's one character that's remained quite mysterious. We don't know a lot about his background prior to becoming Darth Nihilus. We don't
even that he's like an unknown person. Like,
yeah,
I kind of like it though. I like that. He's he is there, like, we don't really know anything about him, who he was before, because typically most Sith have this huge backstory about
who they were before they fell.
Who they were. Yeah. And he's not. It's just like, you don't know him from Adam. You just know that he was tortured and suffered pain unimaginable and turned into this insane weapon of mass destruction.
Yeah, a living weapon. Yeah, that's the interesting part too, is that there's a lot of assumptions that he was a Jedi, which makes sense, being force sensitive, to have been affected like this for the mass shadow generator. But it's not explicitly stated anywhere. He could have been a Mandalorian warrior with like a force ability. He could have been a civilian on the planet when the mass went on Malachor 5 when it was destroyed. Like, he really could have been just a basic Republic soldier. Like, who knows who this guy was? Now, again, a lot of people assume he was a Jedi, but I don't think that that's explicitly stated. And the idea of like this immense suffering of loss actually makes me think that he wasn't a Jedi, because any good Jedi would know not to form such deep bonds and attachments.
Yeah.
So, he could have just been like a farmer on Malachor with his loving family that was just annihilated by this devastating super weapon.
Yeah, I mean, maybe who knows? Maybe he was an apprentice on Corman and was just always a Sith or something too. Like we never know. Like, yeah. It is sort of interesting too that he just has no ideology. Like he's sort of like he only lives for hunger, and I think this is like his name, Nihilus. Like it's kind of nihilistic. It's just everything. Yeah, is to serve yourself, and there's really no meaning in anything. It's just to feed your own hunger.
Yeah, like to perpetuate your existence for as long as possible, and then nothing.
And even his like he didn't even really care to spread his ideology that much. He just cared to feed,
to consume. Yeah. That is actually another interesting point too. It's odd that he was chosen as one of the 3 Sith Lords that Darth Krat ends up consulting with in the far future. I think he was chosen more so for the recognition of, again, being so prominent physically, that they decided to use him because, he doesn't carry a lot of weight as like some heavy philosophical hard hitter or anything like that. So, it could very well have just been a opportunistic that Darth Krat only had access to these 3 Sith Lord spirits in the moment where he's consulting them about like the one Sith. But I always found that a little bit strange that they would choose a Sith Lord who had very little in the way of ideology as someone you would consult in the far future. I did want to go to the creator, one of the writers. I believe it was Obsidian that wrote this.
Yeah.
I can't remember who the name. I want to say it's Chris Avalon, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But that he did give an interview about Darth Nihilus. Well, he gave a broad interview about KOTOR 2 generally, but when asked about Nihilus specifically, I just wanted to read a couple of things that he had said about the character. Again, being that he's so mysterious. His exact identity is never specified in KOTOR 2. I had a specific origin in mind, but not a name, if that makes sense. And what I say here is not canon. He was created when Malachor 5 was torn apart, and he was intended as the exile's other half, one that took a more self-destructive path rather than denying the Force during that battle that ended the Mandalorian Wars. As much as Nihilus embraced the dark side's Force talent of consuming Force sensitives and other life, such as the mass Mandalorian slaughter, the exile took the higher ground and he said himself off from the pull of such power, but we know that the exile did end up being canonized as a woman. Yeah. As powerful as Nihilus' ability is in the short term, the drawback is that it robs the user of almost identity but hunger, but is why never employed by Sith Lords of old, who had no wish to sublimate their identities for any reason. This is from the guy who created the character. So he's almost like the dark mirror of the player character, the Jedi Exile. If you go back and listen to our Mitra Surik episode, or if you've played the game, Mitra Surik, kind of as a defensive mechanism as a reaction to the mass shadow generator weapon, she cuts herself off from the Force, whereas Nihilus embraces the loss and the Force, I guess, wound that's created.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see like what could have happened to the player character had they chosen the opposite path. Not that Mitra Surik really chose, like she instinctively cut herself off from the Force. But that adds, I think, a cool depth to him where like you see him as a dark mirror. I always like characters that are like a foil like that.
Yeah, totally.
The other interesting thing too is and even Kreia brings us up, Sith are very drawn about like acquiring power for self and self-aggrandizement, whereas the reason Sion and Nihilus and we'll get into this in the Kreia episode, Kreia's ideology kind of contrasts with Sion and Nihilus in that they become slaves to the Force. They become like they, being just an object of hunger. He needs the Force. He needs to feed on the Force like a parasite to survive. But
yeah, he doesn't dominate the Force like
Yeah.
I think Traya wants to.
Well, Traya wants to do something more to the Force than
Yeah.
that even. But
Well, yeah,
we'll get
but-
into that. But yeah, and same with Scion as well, being held together by the power of the Force, right? Otherwise, he would be totally destroyed. So they both kind of share that in that they've become, and it's almost like, again, like a mirror of addiction, right? Where like you become so consumed by something that you're just a husk, and your very survival or existence is dependent on whatever it is that you're addicted to.
Yeah, for sure.
Other cool elements, we've talked a lot about how KOTOR 2 talks a lot about war and like the consequences of war, and Nihilus is also like a good example of like someone who has lost everything in war.
Yeah.
And this hunger, this like hollowing out of a person can very much be something that like affects civilians or soldiers, or people who have experienced war and lost a lot in such a sudden, devastating way. So I think there's an element there too of like the consequence of war and what it does to people's souls, the hollowing. Yeah, I overall, he is a very cool character. I do have one gripe with his ability being able to consume entire worlds. It gets in the same territory of like Star Killer,
Yeah.
in that like it's almost overpowered.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to kind of get into also a discussion of just power scaling with his character.
Yeah.
Compared to other very powerful Jedi, but like hypothetically, would he not be like one of the most powerful just in terms of sheer power and ability?
Destructive ability, yeah.
Yeah. In that's ever existed.
Yeah, like that's kind of where I thought, like, how could you even get close to fight someone like that?
Yeah.
One-on-one, right? Like, they would just consume your soul and that's it. You're gone before you even get there. That was always a gripe. Even back when I first played KOTOR 2, I always kind of had that gnawing thought in the back of my mind of he's almost too powerful. I'm sure you could explain away maybe some kind of force shielding you could give yourself.
The one way I thought maybe it worked, and this may have been just my own imagination making this up, I'm not sure if anything concrete has ever been said, but like when he's actually feeding on the Force, he's like in a deep meditative state where it would be like almost impossible to come near him. Like you would just be consumed by his hunger.
Yeah.
Whereas when he's not feeding, he's like more in an embodied state where he's actually more vulnerable.
Yeah, and you could actually
Yeah,
confront him.
Yeah, you could actually fight him. That's the only way in my mind you could like actually explain that. But yeah, you are not wrong in
And
that's not explained, but in my own like imagination, that's how I would explain
you would explain it. Yeah, you kind of headcanon it. Yeah, my thing is more like, you kind of force shield yourself, and like if your will is strong enough, you can resist.
Yeah,
but like he consumed a planet with some of the highest ranking Jedi masters on it,
and like an entire species of people who are force sensitive.
Yeah,
like who use the Force to see.
Yes, yeah.
And
if anyone could shield themselves, it would be someone like that, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Again, just going back to his appearance, Chris Avalon, the writer for him, credited Brian Menzies with creating the visuals for the character, and said that he was inspired by the mask based on the character No Face from Miyazaki's Spirited Away. If someone's familiar with that, if they want to look up that character, there are some very striking resemblances between their masks. Certainly not a copy, but just if anyone thought that there was a resemblance there, yes, it was very intentional. Just kind of a last point. Nihilus's Sith holocron does come up a couple of times. I know it's brought back in Knights of the Old Republic 2, and as I mentioned, Darth Krat somehow gets a hold of it eventually as well and consults it. It's strange the emphasis put on the holocron
Particularly because he had no real philosophy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, what is he
What does he
gonna
wanna
teach?
But at the same time, I'm intrigued, like, because he has no philosophy.
What
like,
did he record?
Yeah, what did he want to actually say?
His
Like,
secret Sith mixtape.
Yeah.
The other funny thing too with him, if you've played the game, the way he speaks is like unintelligible. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like a grumbling noise.
Yeah, it's like a ghost whispering into your ear.
Yeah, but there literally is no words.
Yeah.
So it's not that you could even really understand it, even if you did get a hold of it. But yeah, I mean, I think it almost suffers from like a Darth Maulism, where like they created a really cool, iconic character and they just want to reuse it as much as possible whenever they can.
Could be that, yeah.
Again, like the Holocron's appearance is like a mission in Knights of the Old Republic, the MMO RPG. So it's just like a way to tie in Knights of the Old Republic 2 as like a cool artifact that, you know, has a little bit of story behind it. But I don't know, there's not a lot on it, like in the sense of like written about what's actually embedded in the Holocron. So it is an odd choice for such an iconic
Well, for a guy who
relic.
wasn't really a philosophizer.
Yeah.
Like, I could see, like, Kreia making 1 billion holocrons, right?
Yeah.
Like, she has a lot to say, but, yeah, Nihilus, not so much. But I don't know. Maybe there's, like, some deep, dark secrets of the Force. I mean, he discovered an ability that seemingly no one else prior to him had ever been able to use.
Yeah, again, it goes back to that it's intentional that the Sith Lords who knew about this ability but chose not to do it because of how dangerous it was and what it would do to you.
Yeah.
Right? No one, again, Sith are all about self-perpetuation, and this is the very opposite of that. So
Yeah.
it's almost like hitting a nuclear option. Although certainly he could probably teach how to use it if someone were curious, like as a nuclear option.
Yeah.
And other skills, like not a lot of Sith, like Darth Nihilus was almost like a force of nature. Like he was no longer just a being. He was a walking like force void.
Yeah.
So certainly that kind of existence probably taps him into other secret knowledge too that he could have shared.
Well, that's what I'm thinking too. Yeah, is like he must have very deep esoteric knowledge of the Force.
Yeah,
that,
just from his existence.
Yeah, from his own experience.
Yeah.
But again, how does someone like him even communicate
that? Yeah.
He's like so far beyond
Human.
like our embodied human form.
Yeah.
I don't know what you do, but yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I did also want to mention, I do like his ship, the Ravager, and the whole concept behind the ship. It also feels very gothic, almost like 40K-ish. Even when you're like when you're playing the game, it's like very cathedral-like, very wide.
Big open spaces.
Yeah, big open spaces and stuff like that.
Perfect for void traveling.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I thought a lot about like ghost ships and like, you know, Davy Jones, Flying Dutchman kind of mythology tied to that.
Yeah.
Like if you see the Ravager, it's like floating through space, all kind of wrecked and sparking off and just, you know, in total disrepair, but somehow still functional. You know, like you can picture the tattered sails of a ghost ship floating through space, which again kind of ties to that. Like Nihilus is a ghost. He is an empty shell, a void. Actually, one thing too I wanted to touch on again is his appearance. There was a lot of cut content from KOTOR 2, so if you do some digging, there's some cool little factoids and things you can find. And one was, so they never reveal what Nihilus ever looked like. Again, he's still a very mysterious person under his mask. But there was a leak of an image of the back, concept art for the back of his head. It's not super, like whether or not this could even be considered canon. I mean, how much concept? Actually, Star Wars is weird with concept art. A lot of concept art does eventually make it in as something else. Like Asajj Ventress was like an early Maul sketch. Grievous was also like there's early forms of him that ended up becoming canonized. So I won't say that it's not canon just because it's concept art, but it is just concept art. Well, it's funny. A lot of the original art for Star Wars 2 has eventually been canonized as well, right? But yeah, it's a shot of the back of his head, and He has like long hair, and it almost looks like dreadlocks.
Okay.
From the style of art. So whatever that's worth, it's a shot of the back of the character's head.
Yeah.
I don't know if the coloration of it is just because it was a mock-up, it was just left uncolored, or if it was intentionally left like this really deep, like black. Like you can see kind of the back of his neck and his hair. It's like this deep black. Similar to if you look at the front of his mask, beneath the mask, there's some openings where you can see where his face should be. There's kind of like an outline of like a human face.
Yeah.
But there's not any detail. Like it's just this black void. Just throwing out that we have seen the back of his head in concept art form, but beyond that, there's not a lot else to go off of.
Honestly, it's one of those ones where I hope they don't. They just leave them mysterious.
Sometimes the mystery is the whole point.
Yeah, exactly.
And Nihilus is certainly a character that would benefit from that. Although I do like my headcanon of like, again, being like the echoes of war and stuff. Like he's some farmer that never asked to be pulled into this.
Yeah.
Just a normal dude. And then his life is totally changed forever just by being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And what I would say is like, hey, if you're listening, give us your own ideas or theories, hypotheses of who you thought Nihilus was prior to, and you can send that to us in the mailbag. You can DM us on x.com, Facebook, or Discord. You can also email that to starlordspodcast@gmail.com. But after that, we're going to get into the mailbag right now. Christian, we got a couple of questions from listeners of the show. We're going to start off here with JT. So he says, big fan of the show. Your podcast scratches the legend's itch that Disney refuses to give me. Anyway, here's my question. Say we're in a world where Disney doesn't own Star Wars and any content coming out is pretty decent from a writing perspective. The release timeline is about the same as our world, but they've already finished the Ahsoka, Mandalorian, Thrawn storyline. What Star Wars era should be focused on next? What would you like to see adapted or maybe just created from scratch, and why?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. We don't get a lot of alternative real world history questions.
All the history questions, yeah.
I gotta say, definitely we're in the throes of the KOTOR era. So saying anything KOTOR be canonized into film or television, being done well and having justice given to it. I'd love to see Darth Revan on screen. I'd love to see Darth Nihilus on screen.
Oh, man.
Definitely wouldn't mind exploring the Old Republic era for sure. Alternatively, considering the fact, like if all the facts are true as well, and we've already lost like most of the original Star Wars cast, maybe jumping into the far future and doing like the Legacy era as well would be a good way to appease fans, not have to dance around like the loss of Carrie Fisher, things like that, in order to do like, you wouldn't want to see that era on screen with having replaced the big characters as long as they're still around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think going into the Legacy kind of like jumps all that as an issue altogether, and you kind of have a somewhat fresh slate to explore.
Yeah. One thing I think would be like a cool idea, and they almost flirted with it in the Book of Boba Fett, but I think it could have just been done so much better, and maybe take Boba Fett out of the equation, but you do like a Tatooine-centric TV show, spaghetti western, but it's like you're dealing with all the Hutts and the crime lords and all the stuff.
The real underworld story.
In Mos Eisley. I think that would be pretty cool, and just create like completely new characters. Like don't even connect it. You obviously connect it to the wider universe, but don't have it connected to any of the.
Yeah, don't just resurrect a bunch of like characters from the cartoon.
Precisely. Yeah.
And only deal with them. Yes.
Yeah, and have it deal with all sorts of things. So you have like the big city like Mos Eisley, but you also have like the moisture farmers and
Rural settings. Yeah.
their interests are colliding with the interests of the city, and then you have like the Empire, and then you have the Jawas and the Sand People, right? And you can have like all these factions.
Sir, the Tusken Raider.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I think there's like a whole lot of stories you could write there that are pretty sweet.
Yeah, I definitely like that. And you could do different, like you could do a procedural crime one. You could do like a mafia one. You could do like, there's lots of different angles you could do. I do like that idea. I'm kind of sick of Tatooine only because of what Disney's done
I
to
know.
it.
I know Tatooine is so overdone, but I still think
we're living in a world, let's say, where all that crap didn't happen. Though,
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, you could have in the show, you could have occasional forays onto other planets or whatever, but even having it like, the Senate on Coruscant, they're gonna make some political decision that's like really gonna affect Tatooine or something. They're gonna like apply some sort of moisture tax or something like that.
Oh no, it's episode 1 all over again.
Yeah.
I like that, but I don't know if that'd be like a cool side exploration if you had something mainline to keep the series going and strong in people's minds as an IP. Yeah. Like you couldn't run the entire IP off of a project like that.
No, for sure.
You'd definitely need some kind of like mainline project to keep people interested.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely in favor of that idea.
Yeah, and like I will say, like Book of Boba Fett sort of did like flirt with those ideas.
Yeah, very loosely. You know what? I feel the same way.
I feel like if you took Boba Fett out of the equation and just had like random bounty hunters, like make up your own new bounty hunters, and just like make it its own cohesive story and not have to have the pressure of
dealing with such a legendary figure. Yeah. Even if you included Boba Fett, just do the character justice as he's supposed to be done. But I digress. I'm not going to go down that road.
Maybe he has a cameo or something.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, I'm definitely not opposed to your idea there.
Yeah.
I've said this before, but I don't hate the setting of the High Republic.
Yeah.
I think there's also some very loose, cool ideas mixed in there. So going in a whole other direction of doing something original and new, you could do if you really fleshed out what the universe looks like in that era, what kind of factions are prominent at that time, create some actually good characters for that era to exist in. Kind of like what they did with KOTOR and what they did with Legacy. That's all those are projects where people wanted to do things in the Star Wars universe, but they wanted to be burdened by dealing with established characters and factions and things. And it gave them a little more leeway with what they could do with the universe because they're not beholden to events that have already happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I don't hate the idea of the High Republic either. I even kind of like... I think it's interesting, you're kind of doing almost, it's like the Rome and its peak power before it started to decline, which is what the movies would be.
Are the declining side of it, yeah.
You kind of have like the peak of the Empire's power.
The Pax Romana.
Yeah, exactly.
The Pax Republica.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of has a bit of that aesthetic to it, I think, but...
Yeah.
But
we live in this universe, and unfortunately, that's...
I don't know. I mean, maybe if anyone's consumed any of the High Republic content, let us know. Maybe if you want to come on and be a guest on one of our live streams and
vouch for...
Yeah, give us a rundown on what exactly they're doing there, because I'm not following it whatsoever. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be fair, the High Republic does have a lot of media that I haven't consumed. Everyone knows and hates the TV show, The Acolyte, but... There've been a lot of books and comics and things published in that timeline, so maybe there's a gem in the rough. I'm skeptical, but
for sure,
feel free to try and justify it.
Okay, we got one more, and then we'll wrap it up here. So this is from George. Have you guys made an episode on what happens to Revan after his mind is wiped? I think I've listened to nearly every episode, but don't know what happens after the Jedi Civil War.
Well, we're kind of now getting into the post-Jedi Civil War era here with like the Triumvirate and, Mitra Surik. We did touch a little bit on Revan's future. I think it was mentioned either in Vitiate's episode or in the first part of the Revan episode.
Yeah, in the Revanchist.
Yeah.
If you go back to that episode, can't remember what number it is, but we
mention it very briefly,
Yeah.
but we are working our way towards that time.
The problem is Revan is such a big character, we couldn't fit them all into one episode, so we had to do like his sort of lead up to becoming Darth Revan.
And then even he pops up again, spoilers for anyone that hasn't played the MMO Knights of the Old Republic, but he will reappear there as well, and that kind of tells the other half of his story. So we're kind of working our way towards that because that's still a few hundred years into the future of where we are right now. Kind of for listeners that have been listening to a lot of the show, we do jump around from different era to era, trying to keep some kind of cohesive timeline so we can work through stuff in an organized manner. But, if we start at the very beginning and try to work our way all the way through, it would be like years before we even got to anything in the movie era, let's say. So we do hop around a little bit, but we kind of try and keep those jumps on a relative timeline.
Yeah, if people are like paying attention at all, we will usually do like groups of 4 or 5, maybe 6 episodes
in a distinct era,
in a particular era, and then we'll move on, just so we're not sitting in one era
for too long.
Like you said, we would barely get anywhere. So.
Yeah, we would probably be just now hitting this point in the universe, but like covering there's still a lot we haven't even covered in ancient times. So stay tuned. There's still lots of content to explore. Don't think just because we moved on from this era or that era that we're done talking about it, because we are never done talking about anything on the show.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's about it for today. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks, guys, for listening. See you later.